Yeah, just run with it however you want, Matt. It's not, I'm not trying to overly script it. Just give you some things. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the Peak Performance Group for Mid-Career Professionals. And we have Dr. Matthew McNamee with us again from the Tiger Medical Institute at his office in Bellevue, Washington. Dr. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Well, today what we're going to talk about is stress and low energy and fatigue. And the first question I wanted to talk to you about today, Matt, is, and take this wherever you want to go, what are the short-term and maybe the longer-term medical consequences of stress that is not managed well? Okay, they let it kind of run out of control and they don't learn to manage it.
Sure. Short term, I mean, like right in the beginning, what a lot of people notice is, their eating patterns may change, what they eat, they might be more prone to poor eating habits and poor sleep as well. So those are initial kind of triggers, coupled with spikes in blood sugar and blood pressure. Those are relatively immediate. I mean, those are acute. That happens with acute stressors. If you follow those things, like even the blood pressure component, I mean, long-term consequences, cardiovascular disease, blood sugar, imbalances, the elevated blood sugar, long-term consequences, diabetes. There's even, there's evidence that, it can long-term consequences, but not only short-term with memory, but even long-term, there's changes that happen in the brain with chronic stressors. We've actually shown different parts of the brain, hippocampus and memory center, actually, atrophy to some extent.
Can that lead to memory loss and dementia and
correct.
Even Alzheimer's, correct?
Well, it can play a role in it. Not necessarily lead to it, but yeah, it can definitely play a role in it, and it can play a role in cognitive changes, in dementia for sure. Alzheimer's is a little bit more complex than that, but affect moods, anxiety, depression, certain mood disorders, or long-term, individuals can experience changes in libido, typically drops in libido. And then there's even consequences of stressors that impact the gut barrier function and can kind of have a whole cascade of events that happen from imbalances in the gut's immune system and how it wards and keeps things at bay in the gut.
Well, and immune function is compromised in the here and now when stress is unmitigated as well, isn't it, Dr. Matt?
100%. I mean, anybody can look back. Well, most people could probably look back in their lives and look at very stressful events. If you're studying for midterms, finals, something like that, where you had very short windows of sleep and you were stressed out, and then you end up getting sick, a day or two or three, afterwards. So it definitely can affect the immune system, and they've done studies on it. I think even just 4 to 5 hour window of basically deprivation on sleep can drop the natural killer cells in our body by 70% just one night. So there's definitely impacts.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking, I've heard you talk about this before, in short term, when somebody is under stress and they don't manage it well and it leads to poor sleep, is that can play a role in that formation of that tire around your belly that people don't want. And that it's so stubborn to get rid of. Is that correct? And how does that happen?
Sure. I mean, one of the factors is weight gain. I mean, it's lots of different factors, a lot of the hormones involved. There's multiple hormones, but cortisol, when it is, chronically elevated, can play a role in fat deposition around the abdomen. Typically with elevated cortisol, it's not uncommon to see, insulin levels that are higher as well. And insulin also is it's more of a storage hormone, and that will, deposit around the abdominal region as well for most people. But with the chronic stressors come, the brain's, operates differently under chronic stress. Then it will target, higher calorically dense foods, salty, fatty, sweet type foods. And those can kind of perpetuate the whole cycle. There's other foods that are involved as well that signal our hunger centers and our satiety centers in our brain. So we tend to eat more. And so there's a lot of, factors that play a role in it. But
yeah. Well, and the other thing we want to talk about today is low energy. That seems to be with our clients that we get into our programs. It's common among people that I talk to is low energy, especially when we get into middle age, mid-career. The fatigue sets in. What are some of the root causes that you see, man? I know it's complex, so that it's not something that lends itself to a 1-minute answer, but what are some of the common root or pathways you see to those problems? And I'm sure stress is part of that.
I mean, just with my, the past decade and change or so, working with people that have been typically stressed out, stress plays a role. And there's hormones that play a role, and there's all kinds of different hormones when they're imbalanced can play a role in, energy levels. So, so it definitely can play a role, so if we're looking at the hormone component, chronic stressors can affect, essentially the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and that regulates the hormones that are secreted by the adrenal glands, and those can impact when there's imbalances, and those throughout the system can impact the thyroid levels, can impact the sex hormones, and any or all three of those imbalances, any or all of those can create, kind of a fatigue presentation. But there's other things. I mean, it could be foods that you're putting in that are more pro-inflammatory, or that your food sensitivities to, or food, essentially nutrient deficiencies. So there could be a food component one way or another. It could be something as simple as just not getting quality sleep.
Right.
And then in other people, there's other things going on where they've got, hidden infections in their body, where that's kind of just putting all stress on the system. And
so at the end of the day, you've got to really test to be able to figure out where these root causes are.
Correct. I mean, for most of them, yes. I mean, absolutely. I mean, sleep, you can always, focus on trying to dial sleep in first. Or some people, I mean, if they were going to try something, it'd be like a food elimination diet, pull out foods and reintroduce them to see if you have any, triggers. But a lot of these we test, and to figure out specifically what their, areas of, what areas they need support in, essentially, to help optimize the system.
Well, I had a call with a client today, and when we talk about sleep, it's not just be in bed longer. It's actually a fairly complex thing to solve. And this client had a shortfall of deep sleep. And when I looked at their wake time, bedtime routine, and their eating routine was, what their lack of stress management, all of those things played a role in why this person isn't getting deep sleep. And so we went to work on a couple of things, because you can't do 10 things at once. But with all of this stuff that we're talking about today, it is quite helpful to have someone come alongside you who has data, whether it's a wearable device or whether it's testing, to be able to get at the root issue and go after that. Otherwise, if you live off, what you see in social media potentially, or a magazine, you might not get the results.
I think there's something incredibly powerful by gathering data, and then showing individuals what drivers may be contributing to their certain disease process, pathology, however you want to look at it, right? Imbalances going on within their system. And then coupling it with when we start to integrate specific changes, and they can see with a wearable how it's impacting, and couple it with subjectively how they're feeling, and they get the objective subjective data. I think it's super powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, thank you, Dr. Matt. This has been informative as always, every week. If you're listening to this, or if you listen to it later, and you've got this challenge of low energy and fatigue, or you feel stressed and you can't seem to do anything about it, and it's affecting your sleep, your relationships, your work, just give a thumbs up in the screen or in the comment bar below, or just say, I'm interested in learning more, and we'll follow up with you through a direct message and try to understand what your unique situation is, and then try to answer your questions and go from there. So, Dr. Matt, anything else you want to say before we go today?
No, I think, we can go a lot deeper in all these subjects. It's hard to very just briefly touch base
Yeah,
on even those two
exactly.
different kind of categories. So,
Right. Yeah. We're
but
just trying to give a little bit of,
the bottom line is, if you find out what the root cause is of X, Y, or Z, we have a solution basically.
absolutely.
That's
Okay. Thank you. And have a great day, everyone. And please, if you hear yourself in any of this, raise that hand somehow so we can have a conversation.